Alright, so, imagine waking up one morning and your country is just gone from the map. No Poland, no Polish government, no independent kingdom. Three powerful neighbors had literally divided it between themselves. Alright, so, before we talk about Poland disappearing, we need to understand what Poland actually was. Because this was not some tiny country that nobody cared about. At one point, Poland was part of one of the biggest states in Europe. Okay, so, the story really goes back to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was created in 1569 when the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania joined together more closely. And yeah, this was a huge deal. The Commonwealth covered a massive part of Eastern Europe. At different points, its lands reached across areas that are now Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Latvia, and parts of Russia. Look, on a map, it was enormous. But size alone does not make a country powerful forever. The Commonwealth had a very unusual political system. The king was not simply the ruler who inherited the throne from his father. Polish nobles had a huge role in choosing the king. And these nobles were not a small group sitting quietly in the background. They had serious political power. Here is where things get interesting. The Commonwealth had a parliament called the Sejm. One of the most famous rules connected to it was called the liberum veto. Basically, one member could say no and stop a decision from passing. Yeah, one person. Imagine your entire government trying to pass an important law, and one person stands up and says, nope. And just like that, the whole thing could collapse. At first, this system was connected to the idea of protecting noble freedom. But over time, it became a huge weakness. Foreign powers learned that they could use money, pressure, and political influence to block decisions inside Poland. That was dangerous because Poland's neighbors were getting stronger. Russia was growing. Prussia was growing. Austria was powerful. And Poland had a political system that could make it very hard to respond quickly when trouble came. But do not let that fool you into thinking Poland was already doomed. It was not. The Commonwealth still had a huge population, a large army, wealthy cities, farmland, trade routes, and a strong cultural identity. The real problem was that its political system was becoming harder and harder to control while its neighbors were becoming more aggressive. And honestly, that combination can destroy a country faster than losing one battle. By the 18th century, Russia had become especially powerful in Polish affairs. Russia could influence Polish politics and support leaders who helped Russian interests. That meant Poland was technically independent, but its freedom was getting weaker. And this is where the story starts turning dark. Because Poland's biggest problem was no longer just what happened inside Poland. It was what Russia, Prussia, and Austria wanted to do with Poland. These three powers were sitting around Poland like wolves around an injured animal. And Poland was about to find out just how dangerous its neighbors had become. The country was still alive, but the trap was already closing. Alright, so, by the middle of the 1700s, Poland was facing a serious problem. Its government was weak, its neighbors were powerful, and political fights inside the country were getting worse. Then came the crisis of the late 1760s. In 1768, a group of Polish nobles formed the Bar Confederation. They were fighting against Russian influence and against the growing control Russia had over Polish affairs. The fighting made Poland even weaker. And Russia was not the only power watching. Prussia and Austria were watching too. Here is the scary part. These three countries had their own problems and rivalries, but they could still agree on one thing. Poland was useful. Its land was valuable. Its location was important. And if Poland was too weak to defend itself, why not take some of it? That was the logic. In 1772, Russia, Prussia, and Austria carried out the first partition of Poland. They did not conquer the whole country in one massive battle. They simply took different pieces. Russia took large areas in the east. Austria took lands in the south. Prussia took important territory in the north and west. The Commonwealth lost around a third of its territory and about a third of its population in the first partition. Think about that for a second. One country loses roughly a third of itself. And it is not the end yet. Poland still existed after 1772. But everyone could see what had happened. The neighbors had discovered that they could take Polish territory and get away with it. That was the real danger. And Polish leaders knew they had to do something. They could not just sit there and hope Russia, Prussia, and Austria suddenly became nice. So Poland started looking for ways to fix its government. The country needed a stronger army. It needed a better political system. It needed a government that could actually make decisions. And one of the biggest problems had to go. That was the liberum veto. The reformers wanted Poland to become stronger before its neighbors came back for more. And for a moment, something amazing happened. Poland started changing. The Great Sejm met from 1788 to 1792. And in 1791, the reformers produced something that shocked Europe. The May 3rd Constitution. It was one of the most important political reforms in Polish history. The constitution tried to strengthen the government. It changed the political system. It weakened the old rules that allowed one person to block the entire parliament. It also moved Poland toward a stronger central government and a more stable political system. Basically, Poland was trying to save itself. And honestly, this should have been the moment when Poland finally got stronger. But there was one huge problem. Russia did not like what was happening. A stronger Poland was not good news for Catherine the Great and the Russian Empire. A weak Poland was useful. A strong Poland could become a problem. So Russia stepped in. And the reform movement that was supposed to save Poland became one of the reasons its neighbors attacked again. Poland had finally started fixing itself, and that scared the people who wanted it weak. Okay, so, in 1792, Russia invaded the Commonwealth. Polish forces fought back. This was not some easy Russian victory. Polish soldiers resisted, and the country had people willing to fight for the new reforms. But Poland was facing a much larger power. The political situation inside Poland was also falling apart. Some conservative Polish nobles created the Targowica Confederation and asked Russia to intervene against the reforms. Yeah, Polish political leaders were now fighting each other while a foreign army was moving through the country. That is a nightmare situation. Poland could not simply focus on Russia. It had to deal with internal divisions too. Eventually, King Stanislaw August Poniatowski accepted the situation and joined the Targowica side. The reform movement collapsed. And Russia had won. But Russia did not stop there. Prussia wanted a peace too. In 1793, Russia and Prussia carried out the second partition of Poland. This time, Poland lost another enormous amount of territory. Russia took huge areas in the east. Prussia took large areas in the west, including important Polish lands and the city of Gdansk. The country was now dramatically smaller. The second partition left Poland so weak that independence itself was hanging by a thread. And this is where the Polish people reached a breaking point. They had already lost land in 1772. Then they lost more in 1793. Now what? Just accept it? Give up? Forget the country? No. Instead, a new uprising began. And one man became the face of it. His name was Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Kosciuszko was not just another Polish military leader. He had also fought in the American Revolutionary War. He believed Poland could still be saved. In 1794, he returned to lead an uprising. People from different parts of society joined the fight. Soldiers joined. Townspeople joined. The movement was bigger than just a fight between nobles. It became a fight to save the country itself, and for a short time, it looked like Poland might actually have a chance. Kosciuszko won important early successes. The uprising spread. People in Warsaw rose against the occupying forces. But Russia and Prussia had much more power. They had larger resources. They had experienced armies. And they were not going to simply watch Poland escape. The fighting became brutal. Kosciuszko was eventually defeated and captured at the Battle of Macedon in October 1794. Then Warsaw fell. The uprising was crushed. And once it was over, there was almost nothing left standing between Poland and total destruction. Russia, Prussia, and Austria now had the perfect excuse. Poland had rebelled. Poland had lost. And the three powers were ready to finish what they had started. Kosciuszko had lost the battle, but Poland had not lost its will. Alright, so, now we reach the moment everyone remembers. The third partition of Poland. This was the final cut. Russia, Prussia, and Austria divided the remaining Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth between themselves. There was no independent Poland left. No Polish king ruling an independent Polish state. No Polish government controlling the country. The Commonwealth was finished. The last king, Stanislaw August Poniatowski, abdicated in November 1795. And just like that, Poland disappeared as an independent country. This is one of the wildest moments in European history. Because Poland did not disappear because its people stopped being Polish. It disappeared because three powerful states took control of its territory. The Polish people were still there. Their language was still there. Their culture was still there. Their memories were still there. But the country itself was gone. And it would stay that way for more than a century. From 1795 to 1918, there was no independent Polish state. Think about that. 123 years. That is longer than the entire lifetime of most people. Several generations of Polish people would be born and die without seeing an independent Poland on a normal political map. But the three powers did not treat their new Polish lands the same way. Russia controlled much of the former Commonwealth's eastern lands. Prussia controlled much of the west. Austria controlled areas in the south. And each empire tried to bring its own system into the lands it controlled. The Polish people now had to live under foreign governments. And this created a new problem. How do you keep a country alive when the country itself no longer exists? The answer was culture. Language. Family. Education. Memory. And resistance. Polish identity survived because people kept passing it down. Parents taught their children Polish traditions. Writers wrote about Poland. Poets remembered the old country. Secret groups organized. Uprisings came and went. And again, Polish people tried to bring independence back. This is why saying, Poland disappeared, can be a little misleading. The Polish state disappeared. The Polish people did not. And that difference is the key to the whole story. Because if Poland had truly disappeared, there would have been nothing left to bring back. But there was. The idea of Poland survived. And that idea became incredibly powerful. The map erased Poland, but it could not erase the people. Look, Poland was gone from the map, but the story was not over. During the early 1800s, a new power appeared in Europe. France. And at the center of it was Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was fighting many of the same powers that had taken Polish lands. So Polish independence supporters saw an opportunity. If Napoleon defeated Russia, Prussia, and Austria, maybe Poland could return. And Napoleon understood that Polish support could help him too. In 1807, after defeating Prussia, Napoleon created the Duchy of Warsaw from some of the former Polish lands taken by Prussia. It was not the full old Poland. But to many Poles, it was a huge moment. Polish soldiers fought alongside Napoleon. They hoped that if Napoleon won enough battles, a larger Polish state might return. For a while, the dream seemed possible. But Napoleon's empire eventually collapsed. His invasion of Russia in 1812 ended in disaster. His enemies pushed back. And the Duchy of Warsaw did not survive Napoleon's defeat. Once again, Poland's hopes were crushed. After Napoleon, the great powers met at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. A new political order was created across Europe. Some Polish lands became the Kingdom of Poland under Russian control. It had its own institutions at first, but Russian influence and control grew. The Polish people were still fighting for more freedom. And throughout the 19th century, uprisings broke out. The November Uprising began in 1830. Then came the January Uprising in 1863. Both were eventually defeated. Russia responded with stronger control and efforts to weaken Polish identity. In Prussian lands, German authorities also pushed policies that promoted German language and culture. Polish resistance did not always mean carrying a gun. Sometimes it meant teaching children Polish. Sometimes it meant protecting Polish traditions. Sometimes it meant keeping Polish books alive. Sometimes it simply meant refusing to forget. That is what makes this part of the story so important. A country does not survive only through armies. Sometimes it survives because ordinary people refuse to let its identity die. And Polish identity was becoming stronger precisely because it was under pressure. Poland had lost its borders, but its people were building something no army could easily destroy. Alright, so, imagine growing up in the 1800s. You are Polish. Your grandparents tell you stories about Poland. Your family speaks Polish. You know Polish songs and traditions. But when you look at the political map, Poland is not there. That was the strange reality for generations of Polish people. The borders around them belonged to Russia, Prussia, or Austria, yet people continued to think of themselves as Polish. And culture became a kind of weapon. Polish writers and poets played a huge role. Literature helped people remember that Poland had its own history. Its own heroes. Its own language. Its own identity. The memory of the old Commonwealth stayed alive. And Polish families kept passing that memory down. This is one reason the story of Poland is different from a simple military defeat. If Poland had been completely absorbed into the identities of its neighbors, the story might have ended there. But that did not happen. The Polish language survived. Polish culture survived. Polish political ideas survived. And the dream of independence survived. Meanwhile, Europe was changing. Nationalism was becoming a powerful idea during the 1800s. People across Europe increasingly believed that nations should have their own states. For Poles, that idea was deeply personal. They already believed they were a nation. They just did not have their own country. Then came the First World War. And suddenly, something unbelievable happened. Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary were now fighting each other. The same empires that had controlled Polish lands were on opposite sides of a massive war. For the first time in more than a century, the political situation gave Polish leaders a real opening. Polish soldiers fought in different armies during the war. But Polish political leaders were also working toward independence. And one important figure rose to the center of the movement. Józef Pilsudski. He believed Poland had to become independent again. The war was destroying the old European order. Empires were collapsing. Russia was going through revolution. Germany was losing. Austria-Hungary was falling apart. And suddenly the impossible started to look possible. Poland might return. Not as a memory. Not as a dream. But as an actual country. After 123 years, history finally opened the door Poland had been waiting for. Okay, so, 1918 changed everything. World War I was ending. The old empires were collapsing. Germany was defeated. Austria-Hungary was breaking apart. Russia had been transformed by revolution. And the political map of Europe was being redrawn. This was Poland's moment. On November 11, 1918, Poland regained independence, with Józef Pilsudski becoming the central leader of the new state. Think about what that meant. For 123 years, Poland had not existed as an independent state. Now it was back. But getting independence was only the beginning. Poland had to rebuild a country from pieces that had been ruled separately for more than a century. Different regions had different laws. Different railway systems. Different schools. Different government systems. Different economic conditions. And Poland still had to decide where its borders would be. That became a huge problem. Poland fought several conflicts over its borders after independence. One of the biggest was the Polish-Soviet War. The new Polish state faced the Soviet government to the east. And for a moment, Poland itself was in serious danger. In 1920, Polish forces stopped the Soviet advance near Warsaw in a battle that became famous as the Miracle on the Vistula. Poland survived. But the peace did not last forever. The country had barely returned to the map when another massive European crisis was building. Germany was changing. Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933. Nazi Germany became increasingly aggressive. And Poland was once again sitting between powerful neighbors. This time, the danger was even worse. Because Germany was not simply looking for a few border changes. Hitler wanted to destroy the existing European order. And Poland was directly in his way. The Polish government refused to simply surrender to German demands. Britain and France gave Poland guarantees. But Europe was moving toward another war. And once again, Poland had waited 123 years to return, and barely 2 decades later, another storm was coming. Alright, so, September 1939 is where Poland's story takes another brutal turn. On September 1st, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The German attack was followed by a Soviet invasion from the east on September 17th. The two powers had already secretly agreed on how to divide areas of Eastern Europe through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and its secret protocol. So Poland was attacked from both directions. Germany from the west. The Soviet Union from the east. Poland was trapped. The Polish army fought hard. But the country was facing two huge military powers. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but they could not stop the invasion of Poland. Poland was defeated and occupied. But here is something important. Poland did not simply disappear quietly. A Polish government in exile was created. Polish forces continued fighting alongside the Allies. Polish pilots fought in the Battle of Britain. Polish soldiers fought in North Africa, Italy, and across Europe. Polish resistance groups operated inside occupied Poland. And one of the largest underground resistance movements in occupied Europe developed inside Poland. At the same time, the Nazi occupation was horrific. Millions of Polish civilians were killed. Polish Jews faced the Holocaust. Nazi Germany built extermination camps on occupied Polish territory, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Nazis also tried to destroy Polish political, cultural, and intellectual life. The Soviet occupation in eastern Poland was also brutal. People were arrested. Families were deported. Thousands of Polish officers were murdered by Soviet forces in the Katyn massacre. Then came 1944. The Warsaw Uprising. Polish resistance fighters rose against German occupation in the hope of liberating Warsaw before Soviet forces fully took control. The fighting lasted 63 days. The Germans crushed the uprising. Warsaw was devastated. And once again, Poland paid an enormous price for trying to control its own future. Then the war finally ended in 1945. But Poland's nightmare was not completely over. Because the country that came out of World War II was not the same Poland that entered it. Germany had destroyed Poland from the west, the Soviet Union had taken it from the east, and now the map was about to change again. So here is the thing. When World War II ended, Poland technically existed again. But it did not simply return to the borders and political system it had before the war. The Soviet Union had enormous influence over the new Poland. At the Yalta Conference and later at Potsdam, Poland's borders were changed. Poland lost large territories in the east to the Soviet Union. In return, it received former German lands in the west and north. Millions of people were forced to move. Entire communities were uprooted. Cities changed population. The map of Poland shifted dramatically. And politically, Poland became part of the Soviet-led communist bloc. The Polish government was controlled by communist forces backed by Moscow. Opposition groups were suppressed. The Polish underground resistance did not simply disappear. Some people continued fighting against communist rule after the war. Many were arrested. Some were executed. Others were sent to prison or labor camps. For decades, Poland lived under communist rule. But again, Polish society did not simply accept everything quietly. The country saw repeated protests and strikes. Workers became a major force in the fight for change. Then, in 1980, a new movement appeared. Solidarity. It began as a labor movement at the Gdansk shipyard. But it quickly became much bigger. Millions of Polish people became connected to the movement. Its leader, Lech Walesa, became an international symbol of resistance. The communist government eventually imposed martial law in 1981 to crush the movement. But solidarity survived underground. And by the late 1980s, the communist system across Eastern Europe was weakening. In Poland, negotiations between the government and opposition leaders led to major political changes in 1989. Communist control began to collapse. And Poland moved toward democracy. Once again, Poland was changing its political identity. This time, it was not because Russia, Germany, or Austria had divided it. It was because Polish people were demanding control over their own future. And that is the crazy part of this whole story. Poland had disappeared from the map once. It had been occupied again during World War II. It had lived under Soviet influence after 1945. Yet every time, the country found a way to come back. You can control a country for years, but controlling its people forever is a whole different story. Alright, so, now we can finally answer the big question. How did Poland disappear from the map? The simple answer is this. Poland was divided 3 times by Russia, Prussia, and Austria between 1772 and 1795. The final partition in 1795 ended the independent Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Poland remained without an independent state until 1918. But that is only half the story. Because the more interesting question is this. How did Poland come back? And the answer is the Polish people. The country disappeared politically. The nation did not disappear. For 123 years, Polish people kept their language. They kept their culture. They remembered their history. They remembered their heroes. They kept teaching their children what Poland was. They fought in uprisings. They wrote books. They made music. They joined armies. They built underground schools. They resisted foreign control. And when the opportunity finally came in 1918, Poland was ready. Then came another disaster in 1939. Germany and the Soviet Union invaded. Millions died. Cities were destroyed. Borders were changed. And after the war, Poland once again came under outside political control. But even then, Polish identity survived. By 1989, the communist system was collapsing. Poland became a democratic state again. And today, Poland is one of the major countries of Central Europe. Look at that journey. A powerful commonwealth. A country cut apart. A nation without a state for 123 years. A brief return. A brutal occupation. Decades under communism. And finally, a free democratic Poland. That is why the phrase, Poland disappeared from the map, is so powerful. Because the map really did erase the country. But it failed to erase the nation. And honestly, that may be the most important lesson in Poland's entire history. Borders can change. Governments can fall. Empires can invade. Maps can be redrawn. But a national identity can survive all of that if people refuse to forget who they are. Poland's story is not really the story of a country that disappeared. It is the story of a country that disappeared and came back. And after everything Poland went through, that comeback is pretty wild. They erased Poland from the map. Poland simply waited for the map to change again. Alright, so, Macedonia was down, but Rome's biggest enemy was still waiting. Carthage. And next time, Rome faces its most dangerous war yet. Watch the full story on Natioryx.